So I've skipped ahead a little bit, but I've painted for about half an hour at this point, and I'm just running my painting process through. The reason I've skipped ahead by about half an hour is because it was at a stage where not much really happens. It tends to come together a bit more in the final half an hour that I'm going to talk through here. So what I'm doing now is just trying to make the forms a little bit more readable. So you'll remember that at the beginning I intended on making this little tower here as a bell tower. I actually made the decision in the end to fill in that space so that it was not, it did not have negative space. There was nothing you could see through, and I've just made it into a little roof. I'd considered removing the tower entirely, but in terms of composition it does work quite well, especially from other angles. So I decided just to turn it into a generic roofed tower, and I think this ends up working really nicely in the end actually. It's probably one of my favourite parts of the scene. I also decided to add matching red tiles to the roof on the damaged tower here. So this just brings the piece together. It looks like all of the three towers belong in the same world, belong in the same space. And that highlight of red around the edge of this tower as well just works quite nicely. So at this point we're beginning to get a colour palette coming together, with the purple buildings, red roofs, green plants, and the sort of bluey green colour that we've got as well. So I'm starting to feel quite happy with where this is going, and I also quite like the yellow sand that we've got in there too. So at this point, apart from finalising some areas such as the wood that I'm doing now, I also start to think about just making the scene a bit more readable, because at the moment it's quite messy. And so I just want to tidy up any loose ends, remove anything that maybe is off-putting, check my values, and start bringing it together. So I'm just adding little areas of variation, colour variation. I'm avoiding having large areas of just flat colour, even if there is an area that would be flat colour. I just add in some small areas of variation, just a very slight value or hue shift. And adding in areas of sort of decoration as well. Brings the colours together quite nicely. Some areas that I'm not too sure about, I'm looking at photographs that are going to represent what I want, and so I'm not necessarily going to go in and render everything up nicely. And the final stage will be for me to find photographs, ones that I have already bookmarked for myself, and to put them with my concept so that I can hand this over to a 3D artist and they know exactly what I'm thinking. So I just go in and soften up areas that I haven't gotten around to sorting the shading on yet. I don't tend to use the smudge tool very often, but it does work nicely on some areas. So here I need to refer back to my original block out for lighting. You can see now that for the most part I've kind of moved away from it, but in terms of general shapes for areas of lighting, it was very important and very useful. For a 3D artist working with this, the scene is obviously going to be stylized. It's not going to be realistic. I haven't tried to represent it in a realistic way. And so I think it will be a case of perhaps for getting some of the colours and shadows and things like that, it might be a case of using hand painting or shaders. Just tidying up some areas where I'd perhaps been a bit messy. You see here that I changed the scene to black and white very briefly, and I do that to check my values. I haven't done that using just a black and white filter over my scene. I've set up proof colors so that when I press Ctrl Y, it changes my scene very quickly to black and white for me. I do that by going through to View, Proof Colors, and clicking Custom, and I set it to dot grain 20%. And that is a very nice way of just quickly checking my values without having to set up any other shortcuts. Just getting the foliage in now. It's not much of a flower shop if there isn't any flowers. And I'm just keeping the shapes really simple, partially because I want to get this done as quickly as possible, because it's a concept, not a work of art. And also just because it's an easier read. If this is for a stylized piece of 3D art anyway, it's likely that we will be keeping the shapes as simple as possible. Just getting a bit more lighting in there. It's always nice to get as many colourful highlights as possible. And that green of that grass is really nice. I just wanted to get more of that in there. And now I'm going in just tidying up shapes using the ellipse select tool. And then just going in and tidying up the edges of my concept space. Just trying to keep the shape interesting. I'm happy with that. Just adding a few little details here and there, nothing serious. And the piece feels now like it's starting to come together. It feels consistent colour-wise. There's nothing too overwhelming in terms of very bright areas that draw your eye, or very dark areas that may also draw your eye. And I just thought I'd go in and just try and bring some of the purples down to blues down to a more purple colour, make it feel warm like sand. And also these areas are supposed to be in shadow, so they should be darkened down a little bit too, which I do come in and do. I like how this kind of purpley colour looks next to the yellow sand. I'm constantly zooming all the way out, and I try and work as far away from the piece as possible so that it works compositionally from a distance. If you're zooming in and looking at it right up close all of the time, you'll probably find that when you do zoom out, it doesn't look so great. So I'm trying to make it work as a whole rather than as lots of individual little areas. I'm just testing colours for areas too. Testing the values again, using Ctrl Y. I'm quite happy with where the values are going. It's much more readable now. Reaching the end of the concept now, so I'm just going in and adding in a few details, some blades of grass, just to affirm that that is definitely grass and not some sort of green paving stone. Just having these little silhouettes of grass is always quite nice to have. Just adds, as well as looking nice artistically, it does just make a point that this is definitely grass. To go in and tidy up a few areas as well. With these bushes that I missed earlier, I wasn't sure what colour to do them because I kind of liked how they looked when they were lighter than the roof in front of them. So in the end I actually just went for a lighter green rather than making them the same colour as the ones around the base of the scene. And I was experimenting with adding another one of a similar kind of colour, but in the end I decided not to. I decided to go in and sort of cut into the shape of the scene, just to give the idea that there's something else there, that it's not just totally isolated in space, and it kind of makes the shape of the base a bit more interesting as well. So that's just kind of a fun stylistic thing rather than it being of any functional use. And I experimented with sort of silhouetting things in the foreground as well, but I found it was a bit distracting in the end, so I took them out. But you can see how you can experiment with things like this very quickly to make more interesting scenes. I wanted to go in and add a few very subtle gradients to areas that were in shadow, just to improve the values a little bit more and the separation between different planes. So I just took a very soft brush and started darkening some areas, and it just made it look like there was a little bit of ambient occlusion in there. It's always something I just add in at the end, very subtle. Kind of grounds the scene a little bit more, and I could have spent a lot longer going in and doing this and it would have made the scene feel a lot more grounded, but this does the trick for now. I go to lighten up the values around the door here because that is the focal point of the scene, as it were. That's where I'm leading the eye up to. So I actually go in and I really lighten up the values there. I bring them back down in the end because it was a little bit overwhelming. But because the values around the door are so dark, adding in much lighter values, you can see when I change it to black and white, your eye is drawn to that area of very high contrast. So the eye is drawn to contrasty areas where there is light and dark. last but not least, I decided to just add a few more flowers and plants to set the scene a little bit more. Areas that I had thought about adding plants to earlier and then not got around to doing. It's just an opportunity to add more colours as well. Once I've added in all my plants, I'm happy to call the scene done. So from this point, I'm thinking a little bit about what kind of flowers I could imagine being in this scene. So I'm thinking of what a 3D modeler would have to research, basically, if they were to try and make this. So I'm thinking about what images I can begin to collect now, material swatches that would be used as reference by a 3D modeler. And that's the final stage of creating this concept. I will just grab some swatches for materials, for atmosphere, for colours if I need. Anything that makes a 3D modeler's job easier and quicker. And then we'll be done. So here is my concept in its final form. I'm not going to add any more to it. I could, of course, as with anything, continue forever. What I'm going to do now is just spend 5 or 10 minutes just making it as usable for a 3D artist as possible. It won't take long. Basically, I'll go to Pinterest and look up red flowers. And you always find things like this that are very useful. So I think for this piece, perhaps a garden rose and peony would work. So I'm just gonna take myself back here and look for peony. These are very nice. We want a red peony though. Lovely. So there is our red peony. And we want a red garden rose as well. Okay. You can see already that these match my colours pretty much perfectly for my flowers. So variants of these I think would be good for my flowers in this scene. So I'm just gonna quickly add in, probably in white. There, so now we know. That's what we're dealing with our flowers. I think I can imagine the roof tiles being terracotta. So I think looking up something like that would be good. I like this style. Yeah. I think the shape isn't quite right though. I think these work well. the colour isn't quite right, but it gets the idea across. I want to go back to my board and grab some bits of reference too. Specifically this. I liked this from the beginning, and so I think it's worth just keeping this as a piece of reference in there. Okay. What else? Where is the... Here we go. In terms of design and colour reference, I think this works really nicely. So I'm just going to cut out what I don't need. Just refer that to there. In terms of stonework design, I think this is my best piece of reference that I could find. Quite subtle, and again the colour's not there, but that's exactly what we were going for. If we're working with a kind of desert environment, it might be worth making a point of the kind of plants that are going in there. So I didn't add in all of the I didn't get around to adding in all the cacti that we could have in there, perhaps. But I would be making references to photographs like this. And I really like these sort of hardy desert grasses that you get. So this is the kind of thing I think we should have in the scene. This is nice. Okay. So I think we can call this done. You've followed me from making this from a block out through to the final concept. I hope you've found it interesting seeing the different ways that you can play with lighting and colour and experiment in the run-up to creating the final painting, rather than just jumping straight into sketching and painting to create a design for something. So I'm Anya, and thank you for watching.